Hello and welcome to the Futures in Digital Learning podcast. This is our very first podcast of 2026, and we are excited to get back on your listening schedule for the new year. Once again, I'm Adam Davey, Instructional Design Manager here at UCAT at the University of Arizona, joined always by my co-host, Brian Hale. Hey, Brian.
Hey, everybody. Happy 2026.
Yeah. And today we are joined by our special guest, Maxine Frendel. She's the Manager of Design and Development at Western Governors University. Maxine and I met at various OLC conferences over the years, and I'm excited to talk to her today about her vision for online discussions. So welcome, Maxine.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Hi, Adam. Hi, Brian. Really excited to be here today.
Excellent, excellent. So tell me, just real quick, we're going to talk about online discussions. I know that's a very hot topic in the world of online and digital learning. People have a lot of opinions about it. Briefly, I just want to hear how do you approach online discussions? What guides you when you have to build out those online discussions?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I really like to approach it as something that's an intentional learning experience, not just the participation requirement that's been handed down from these, ghosts of academia past. We do discussions, check, I did it. Or also not approaching it as like the most high stakes, most intensive assignment or exam that the student is going to be taking. Something that's really aligned to the learning outcomes, something that fosters the presences of the community of inquiry, something that's supporting social interaction in the course. And then also some different approaches depending if this is a synchronous or asynchronous course. If it's an online discussion for a synchronous course, thinking about it as maybe something that could help students prepare for those synchronous sessions. So giving students a chance to think through their ideas, think through their approaches before you come to that synchronous session, and kind of give everybody a chance to participate. There's some students who are like always raising their hands and talking in those synchronous sessions, some who may like a little bit more time to think through those ideas. And I like how the online discussion really kind of puts everybody on an even playing field to be able to participate. At the same time, in the asynchronous course, thinking about having the online discussion being that place for the social interaction, especially in online learning, we can see how being isolated and kind of being in that vacuum of just learning by yourself can be troublesome. So having that opportunity to connect with peers, I think, is especially more important in those settings. I've also approached it as a way for students to actually practice before those higher stakes assignments. So I used to teach writing at the University of Chicago, and I would use the discussion forum for students practicing their writing skills before those larger assignments. It also gave me an opportunity as the instructor to kind of gauge the skills that students were entering the classroom with already, and then kind of rectify any misconceptions before we moved on to those larger assignments. Okay. Or when we're kind of thinking of scaffolding up to maybe a final project, final exam, final essay kind of thing, using the discussion board to kind of work through the ideas once again in that lower stakes way, to kind of be that entry point to build up to the larger assignment.
Very cool. That's awesome. That's a very, very interesting ways to approach those, the use of those online discussions. So thinking about that and all those different ways, what is the biggest challenge that you see when trying to build those out?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think there's a lot of challenges, honestly, which is why there's this, such frequently talked about, sometimes loved, sometimes despised thing here. I think just to go through a few of the challenges, like cognitive overload, when there's unclear expectations, or maybe there's just too many directions. Students just don't know what to do. They don't know what's expected of them. Or also, since online discussions are something that happens in a lot of different courses, but those courses may have different goals, they might be at different parts of the student's sequence.
Yeah.
If they're used to doing discussions in one way and now they come to your course and they're being asked to do something else, they just might not really be actually sure what the expectation is. So I see a lot of problems with cognitive overload. Also, just not asking the right kind of question. So, questions that are not robust enough to sustain discussion, like a closed or, one right answer type of question or a knowledge check type question, you're just going to get a ton of repetitive answers. And there's really not then that discussion piece of actually talking about something, right? And then we see really the conversation falling flat if there's just agreements, just like, good job, I agree with you. It's like, okay, well, thank you, I appreciate that, but is there anything else we could say here? Also, just kind of thinking about alignment to the learning objectives and course goals. I mean, everything in instructional design is alignment, but I think we can really be intentional about how we're thinking about, what we want to measure, what we want the student to get out of the experience, and then how we can actually design the experience to facilitate that.
See, Brian, this is where we need our sound effects, because we use the buzzword alignment right there.
I've got my screen deck.
Have the cheering.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on the fact that you brought up a cognitive overload and student expectations, because I always find myself in this, kind of weird situation when I'm working with instructors and saying, like, yeah, you have to lay out the expectations. You have to, give them clear outline of what they need to do. And then sometimes that turns into just a really long list of instructions, right? But then if you don't give them enough, they're not going to do it the way you want. So how do you balance that of providing those expectations without them getting to the point where they're like, oh, too long, didn't read?
Definitely. And I also see the kind of flip side of that as well. Like, we have the too many instructions, too long, but then we also have the too little with some instructors, some professors. I don't want to give it away. I don't want to tell them the answer. Right. And it's like, clarity is not the opposite of rigor. I say that a lot. It's like, clear is kind, Yeah. So something I like to do is actually kind of have a template that's like, if we're doing a weekly discussion or, bi-weekly, however it's happening in the course, actually kind of giving the same instructions each week of like, instructions on how to engage with peers, what the length should be, having the learning objectives right on the page there, the expected activity time, those sorts of things. So students kind of know week to week it's going to be the same. After a few weeks, they're like, okay, I get it. These instructions are basically the same. They're not changing. And the only thing that's actually changing week to week is the actual prompt of, in your initial post, do this. Right. And maybe that's just, and then we kind of get into like, I like to have just one main question. If there are other questions or supporting sentences, kind of using that to have students answer the first question. But I think where students get overloaded in prompts is when we have like a ton of questions and they don't know which is the one we actually want them to answer and which are the ones that are supposed to help them get there. So like, just like a plain example, if I'm like, what did you notice in this week and how does it connect to the theories from class? We're really interested in how it connects to the theories from class. We're not like, it would not be sufficient if they just said, here's what I noticed in my week, period. Right. It's like, so then telling them, you should use your observations from the week to connect to the specific theory, to kind of explain what we're hoping they get out of those two questions, if there's multiple questions there.
Okay. So keeping it simple from the prompt standpoint, not overloading them with, here's 3 questions or 5 questions, respond to each of them. But instead just saying like, no, just do one question, but do it with depth.
Yeah. Or like, here's what I'm really hoping you focus on, but you can use these other questions to guide you to figure that out. Here's kind of the main idea here, but maybe these other questions can help you think of some evidence for your viewpoint to really support your claims.
Okay.
I think it's really nice how you structured those prompts. You can't answer those prompts with a yes or a no. You've got to really think about what your answer is going to be. And that's something I need to start telling the instructors I work with. If your prompt can be answered with a yes or no, your students are going to answer it yes or no. But if you design it so that you can't answer with a yes or no, you're going to get a much more robust discussion and engagement from them.
Or even if it, like, I totally agree with that. And also, if a professor really wants to do that debate style prompt, like a focal prompt, where they, are like, are you on this side? Or are you on this side of the debate? And there are two sides. The prompt really needs to be focused to have students share their reasoning of even saying, like, what's most important here is what's supporting the yes or no, not just whether you're saying yes or no. Because there may be variety in how students are supporting their claims, or like, multiple students with the yes might have different ways they came upon the yes, which can be insightful or helpful. But all of that has to really be directed. Otherwise, just as you say, students are just going to put the yes or no, and then, that's not very helpful.
So I'm curious if you use rubrics to help with some of that direction. If you provide students with like, this is what we're looking for in your responses, and so that can help guide you as you fill those out, and in your your initial post and your replies as well. Is that something that you use, and if so, how do you develop that?
Yeah, I'm a strong champion for rubrics. And honestly, I have to shout out my previous supervisor and mentor, Nicole Messier. She's the Associate Director of Instructional Design at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where I used to work, and where a lot of this discussion research and kind of my focus on discussions really started. But she is a huge champion of equitable grading and has really taught me everything I've known about rubrics. There's a lot of great resources on the UIC website on using rubrics, so I'm kind of going to be paraphrasing them here. But I think earlier on in my career, I worked with a lot of professors who did think using the rubric gave it all away and like diminished the rigor. And I wanted to support them. So I was like, okay, whatever you think is best in your class, that sort of thing. But like I said earlier, clarity is not the opposite of rigor. Being clear is kind, and being clear really shows the student what's needed. The strong rubric can really help reduce the cognitive load, include criteria for what the professor's really looking for in that initial post, the depth of critical thinking, what they're looking for in the reply engagement, what they're looking for in terms of students integrating the evidence. And they could also emphasize that meaningful contribution to the learning community of, like, it's most important that you're actually discussing and collaborating with your peers versus just like doing a quick reply and kind of hopping off the discussion board, that kind of thing. So I try to design rubrics thinking about measuring actual thinking, not just participation. Like, yes, you did it, check.
Right.
That's not very helpful. And when I'm going into it with professors or instructors, and we're thinking about how the discussion is kind of functioning in the course, that's when I really get into conversations about what the other assignments in the course are like, how many discussions there will be, and really what the instructor's bandwidth and workload is like of how they want to grade it, because that really informs the type of rubric I might suggest. If there are a lot of different grading criteria that we really want to break out into performance levels, like, proficient, exemplary, developing, those sorts of things, those rubrics can be more time consuming to create. And they can also be a little bit more time consuming to grade, because there's a lot more criteria we have to click through. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to distinguish, like, what's really like an exemplary versus a proficient, discussion post, or, we kind of might know what the, like, not quite there yet, or, developing range might be, but sometimes the distinguishing between that, like, A and B range is really difficult. So a lot of times I honestly advocate for like the single point rubric, or like more of a checklist rubric, which is really just like meets criterion, did not meet criterion. So you could still break out, the initial post quality and what you're looking for, the replies, those sorts of things. But then it's just, did the student do that, or did they not do that? Right. Other instructors likes to also have the exceeds criterion if they want to have an opportunity to, give extra credit or kind of call out exemplary replies. I've also worked with instructors who wanted to create a holistic rubric, which is basically when like every grading criteria is in one paragraph of like, I want you to do all of these things. And it's like, did you do it and did you not do it? Those are quicker to create. If like the course is launching tomorrow and you're like, I need a rubric. Okay, here it is. But those are going to take more time to grade because then you need to also give individual feedback to each student of what they actually did or didn't include there. Right. So I just really like to talk with instructors about, what time constraints we're on, where does this fit into the course, what is your bandwidth, how do you like to grade, what are you looking for, and then we can decide on really the type of rubric that would support them.
That's really cool. This is why I love doing this podcast, because I learn so much from my guests, and that's a conversation that I don't think I've ever really had with instructors about the different types of rubrics. I just am like, let's make a rubric. Let's do it. But,
well, I thank Nicole for that. And there are some really wonderful resources that she's developed that I use a lot and just, share with instructors of like, because they appreciate it too. They're like, I've never heard of this. I've seen these rubrics before. I've been a student and I've noticed that a rubric may look this way, but kind of putting that language to it and actually having that teaching opportunity with the instructor can sometimes be really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really cool.
I want to ask a question. Is there a way, I've been trying to think of a way to make grading discussion posts easier for my instructors. And one thing I suggest to them is allow the students to grade each other's responses, because that gives some weight to not only how they are responding to somebody, but it lets them see other people's responses and get different viewpoints. Have you encountered that before? And if so, like, would you suggest a rubric for something like that so that the students can sort of kind of police each other on what their responses are and what an instructor might be looking for? Or would that be more of an informal type of additional response from the student saying, this was a good post?
I mean, I think that's great. And I think it kind of, I've been in, so I'll say yes to that, but we'll have a few ideas here. First of all, like introducing a peer review element like that can be really helpful, because that also kind of ups the social interaction elements of the course and kind of creates buy-in for students of like, people are actually, like my peers are actually reading this and I'm excited to actually read what they say versus just putting it on the discussion board and kind of never coming back to it. But I do think whenever there's some kind of peer review element or grading of each other's work, a rubric or, very specific guidelines of here's what you should look for in your peers' responses is very helpful. Otherwise, people will just do the like, good job, I liked it. Or like, or the opposite. I didn't like it. And it's like, well, that if it's good, what is good about it? What did you like about it? What was eye-opening for you? Or is there different, like if you support the person's claim, is there different evidence they could have used? Are you questioning them in any way? Can you see it differently? Kind of giving those options of how they actually should do the grading to kind of give something concrete. I mentioned using previously teaching writing. I would do a lot of peer review with different writing assignments, whether it was discussion boards or other things. And earlier on, if I just said peer review it, you would just get a range of responses and it wasn't really exactly what you were looking for. At the same time, I've seen great success of actually developing rubrics with students, like in the first week of class of, I want this assignment to be meaningful for you all. What do you think we should look for in each other's responses? And actually having that conversation and developing the rubric together. That also helps create buy-in because students feel motivated to contribute, based on what they provided early on in the course. And then also they kind of feel like agency and, it provides some choice, like in some ways supporting UDL, those universal design for learning, those sorts of things. So I think co-designing with students rubrics can be really helpful, whether it's for discussion boards or something else. Right. Like also, if you're thinking about like, we're going to be using these discussion posts to connect. I'll go back to that previous example. Things we're seeing in our week and real life experience to the theories from class. What do you think we should look for? And what do you think would make that successful? Can really be helpful for students when you're co-designing together.
I think like that's nice conversation. To be able to pull it back later on, because then the students don't feel like the discussion posts may have been busy work. Oh, we're going to actually write and respond to people, and then we're going to use that stuff later on in the course to build this thing. Yeah, I think that's a great piece of buy-in from them too.
And I think the framing helps the buy-in of like, we're going to use the discussion boards to talk through these theories from class that you'll eventually have in the final exam, or that'll eventually be a part of the final project. Or I want you to revisit 2 of your posts from the course and incorporate them into this final project or something like that. That can really help them understand why it's important and why it's not just busy work. And when you're doing that co-designing together, it's not just this like top-down thing that the students inherit and they like have to be judged for it. They feel like they had some sort of say and agency there.
Sorry, I'm a little speechless because I'm just thinking of like how I can incorporate some of these ideas into courses I work on. So this is really great.
Oh, I'm glad it's helpful. Yeah, these are like my favorite things to talk about. So discussions, equitable grading, like these are like some of the things I love the most. And something I was just thinking about too, when we were thinking about designing rubrics with instructors, I've been using AI for that a lot, actually. It's a great place that you can, you could have a custom GPT of what you're looking for in a rubric to have student-centered, positive language, making sure the proficiency levels go left to right of like highest to lowest, which the research supports actually help students believe they could reach that higher level, like, no demeaning language, that kind of thing, and kind of just do a first draft of it and come to the meeting with the instructor to say, here's what it would look like if it was a holistic rubric. Here's what it would look like analytic. Here's an example of a single point rubric. Which one's best for you? Have that rough draft and just edit it. But AI has made it so much quicker for me to come to those meetings with like a very simple draft and move it from being this like rubric theory to actually a concrete thing that I'm showing them in the meeting.
Yeah. So you don't have to waste so much time in the meeting actually like coming up with the language, but you can, let AI do that and have the conversation be a little bit more productive.
Yeah, and just kind of edit it. And, obviously you have to look at it, change things. It's not always correct. It hallucinates, all these things we know about AI, but it's definitely a good starting point.
Yeah. Make sure it doesn't, throw in a secret reference to waffles or something.
Yeah. And I always like to go back and say, here's the final rubric we settled on. So it starts to learn my tone better and starts to like understand like, oh, here's where we made the changes of. So like kind of those drafts get better and better the first draft.
Yeah. So you can help train.
So I want to ask a question. Do you think when you're setting up your discussion boards that you should lock them down so people have to post something first before they can see others' responses or others' posts? Or should you just leave the discussion board open so they can sort of take a tour through what everybody else is thinking and then write the exact same thing, but with just some different words?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I'm definitely an advocate for the former. There's usually good settings in the learning management system to kind of lock down the discussion board, because that's also where discussion boards fall flat. The first person writes something, everybody else sees it. The second person writes something similar to the first, and we just have this regurgitation of ideas, but not actual critical thinking. The other setting I like to do, because, students game things, is not only lock it down, but also like no editing. So if a student could just write like A, B, C, D, E, get access to the discussion board, read everything, and then go back and edit their post. So that's like the lockdown of the lockdown. Not that I like to be, an authoritarian over here, but I'll admit that I don't think those LMS sittings existed when I was a student in undergrad. I don't even think the LMS I used exists anymore. I was definitely somebody who would read the other peers' responses before. So I just know as a student, that's what I did, right?
But I think you were reading them because you wanted to not necessarily parrot what they were saying, but you wanted the form and the structure of what they were saying to give you an idea. But I think to the point of putting a rubric in there, if you have that rubric, you know what your instructor's looking for. So you don't necessarily need to see what somebody else is writing. You've got the rubric, you can write to that rubric without, letting your imagination and your thoughts and your synthesis of the material flow, rather than just, parroting what somebody else said. So
exactly. Yeah. Preserving the space for your own critical thinking while still having some guidelines. And I think that the way the instructor kind of talks about discussions in class can be helpful for that too. Just the framing of like, I don't expect your posts to all look the same. We have different ideas. We have different styles of writing. What I'm really looking for here is the quality and content of your ideas, not, if you're not teaching grammar in the course, that really shouldn't be or syntax or something like that. That really shouldn't be a huge component of the grading, because you can't score something you're not teaching the student in that class. It has to be like a very small percentage of it. So I think students get really hung up on like, does my sentence sound good versus do I have a quality idea that's rooted in synthesis, analysis, course content, those sorts of things.
And that's going to drive them to AI to write the post for them too, if they think they're getting graded down on mechanics or grammar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Well, sorry. I was just thinking, what, as a student, what would you recommend to a student that goes into the discussion board, writes their post, has to respond to 2 other posts, and the posts they pick, the quality of those posts is just not there?
That's a great question. So something that I really like, and I actually got this idea from an OLC webinar in 2023 that Rob Rose did. I think he's out of Florida. It's using discussion roles as part of the replies. So basically, either having the student choose their role, which supports universal design for learning as well, or just kind of assigning the role of providing more evidence for the students, the initial post's claim, asking a question about that initial post, kind of doing the devil's advocate of, assuming the opposite and trying to convince them out of it. Maybe, there's lots of different roles that you could consider kind of based on your course and what matters. But I think when students kind of have something that they can do in the replies is really helpful. So then it kind of isn't focused as much on what the initial post, whether the quality was strong or not, because there's something for the student to do. So even if it's like, I don't know, some claim that doesn't really seem like it would hold up or something, the student can say, I see you have this claim, but did you consider all these pieces of evidence? Or I like your claim, but I don't think the evidence was great. Did you consider these things? Or I like your observation from this week. I kind of had a similar thing happen to me, but it actually made me think of this other thing. Kind of just giving something they could sink their teeth into versus like, oh no, the initial student only wrote 2 sentences, so I don't really know what I'm going to say.
Yeah. And I would say with that, one of the other issues that I see with the post and reply technique is, students tend to they post and then they reply to the first 2 that they see right after them, right? So how do you get that kind of diversity? How do you get the students to spread out, reply to different people each week, and make sure everybody gets a response? And I know there's some tools, we have access to feedback fruits here at University of Arizona, which has capability to do some of those things, but within an LMS, there's not really a way to do that. So how can we encourage that with students?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I like to advocate for staggered due dates of basically having the initial reply due, let's say Wednesday of that week or something. So everybody puts their first reply there. they have a moment to actually read it. And then maybe the replies are due on Friday or something, because otherwise, if we have everything due on that Wednesday, you have the 2 students who did it on Tuesday that everybody's replying to. Right. And then you have everyone at 11:59 on Wednesday trying to get their reply in and trying to do, the initial post at the same time. And the conversation kind of falls flat. And that really emphasizes to students, like, I care about your initial post, but I actually care about the replies more. I mean, I haven't taught any courses this way myself, but I have worked with instructors who really actually only graded on the replies. So the focus was fully on the conversation. It was not on even the initial reply at all. That was just like the seed, the brainstorming starting point to get us going. But I always advocate for the staggered replies. I also advocate for instructor participation to really extend the thinking. It's not that the instructor has to answer every single student each week, but the instructor can really model what those replies look like with kind of open-ended, like maybe Socratic style questioning of, have you considered this? Or, this reminds me of what we talked about last week, those sorts of things, to really model what's expected. If the instructor is replying to everybody just saying like, great job, students are going to think that's what they're supposed to do too.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool.
All right. So I've got a question.
Go for it.
Instead of typity-type, clickety-click, text-based discussions, what do you think about video discussions? What do you think about audio discussions?
I'm really glad you brought this up, because those are some of my favorite things. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you could incorporate this. Even when giving feedback, a lot of learning management systems allow the instructor to give video or audio-based feedback, even if you are doing the text-based discussion. But I love using alternatives like video and audio, which kind of discourage, in some ways, AI use as well, because some of it of course, a student could like put something up on their screen or just read it. Like we can't AI prove everything, but I think that having that audio and video based really increases the social presence and that kind of social interaction, especially with an online asynchronous, and really gives a student opportunity to speak with one another. I've used VoiceThread in the past, which I think is a really great platform. There's other tools that do similar things, but that kind of gives students the option of doing audio, video, or even bringing in images, annotating them and talking over them. Just kind of increasing that choice for students, increasing that motivation, supporting UDL, but also it's just more fun. It's more exciting, especially if students have done so many of these text-based things and they're like, oh, this again, it's kind of more fun and more motivating to do something different. I've seen some cool, exciting kind of genre pushing things too, in terms of posting images or kind of doing scavenger hunts on more of the text-based platform. So kind of adding in multiple layers of media, or looking for news stories, or looking for videos that support whatever was discussed in class that week, or kind of gamifying discussions. Like there was another great OLC presentation I went to with Rachel Lauder from Loyola, Maryland, and she had some great suggestions on like doing would you rather like type questions, or like red flag, green flag of like strengths and weaknesses in an idea, or what's your hot take, bracket challenge, like kind of have different concepts from class and like pick the best one. Could be really exciting from students. Opportunity to include video and audio there. I was in a course once working with an instructor who had the students communicate on Slack instead of the text-based LMS. So it was way more conversational. It was a lot more casual, but the students got more into the ideas because they weren't worried about the syntax of their sentences. It was almost like, instant messaging. But she had a Slack channel where they were supposed to create memes using the course content. And the students loved it. I mean, they really got into it. They were really creative. And that kind of real world application of course content also supports the learning so much. I know I went a little bit beyond video and audio there, but I think there's just like so many applications and ideas to move beyond the traditional tech space.
I agree. I think one of the problems I encounter is hearing from an instructor, I don't really have time to watch all those videos. I don't have time to go through that. And I'm like, well, you're the instructor. If you don't have time to do your homework that's required to teach your class,
just listen to them at double speed. You'll be fine.
There you go. Yeah.
Or, you know, tell them to each student to do a minute, or that's where you could have it, the students kind of review and grade each other's too, or, you know, have each student do a minute video, a 30-second reply, and tell the students, I'm just looking at your replies. So the quality of the conversation is really important. Or, you know, that's where student choice can come in as well. We're doing 9 discussions in this course. I'm only going to grade 7 of them. So at the end, you pick the best 7 you want me to look at, that kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, I think there's ways that you can maybe kind of work with the faculty to respect their bandwidth and the limitations they're under, but also be like, you could still watch these videos.
Yeah.
I mean, I watch like everything on double speed. So
yeah,
you know,
no, I a couple cool things that I've seen instructors do with discussions. One, which I thought was the most fun, is she was doing a course on movies in Italy. And one of the assignments was they had to design like a product advertisement for something from one of the movies. And then they had to pitch that advertisement. And so we did that in the discussion board. And then the other students voted on which product had the best advertisement. So it was kind of a fun little game to play, and they got to put visuals in there, and it was engaging. It was cool. It was different. And then one of the other things I did is professor gave like 3 options for prompts for students, so they got to choose what they wanted to respond to and how they wanted to respond to that week's particular content, and I thought that was a nice way to get a little bit more engagement, because students could feel like they have some more choice in what they're responding to.
Yeah, I think I love that. I think choice can be really helpful, whether it's one prompt, but they're choosing the medium. Like you could use text, video, or audio, or a few different prompts to kind of have different conversations going on the board. I think what's troublesome is when you have like 10 options and then it's like a million different directions. Right. But, you know, student choice always supports that motivation and buy-in. So I think all of that is great. Any way that we could kind of mix it up for the students and make it be a little bit different than what they're expecting and really have that real world application. And I don't know, think about how students are communicating today and how we can kind of bring that into the classroom to meet them where they are.
Yeah. Yeah, how do we have them create like Instagram reels or TikToks?
Exactly.
In the discussion boards and share like, information that way.
Find a TikTok that exemplifies this sociological phenomenon or theory we discussed this week. Like see it in your own life. Yeah. That's way more engaging than just like what is the theory, or you know, tell me about the theory you learned or something like that. And I think too, like, when we're thinking about going back to that alignment kind of buzzword that we had at the beginning here, and thinking about where we are in the course can also be really helpful. Because if it's the beginning of the course and we want those kinds of more open-ended things, like there's a study that I learned about in that OLC webinar where researchers kind of looked at different kinds of prompts, they coded them, and then they looked at the levels of critical thinking that came out of the prompts. And like we kind of mentioned earlier, those prompts that only had one answer didn't really have high levels of critical thinking. And also kind of a brainstorm or general invitation sort of prompt that's just very open didn't really have those high levels of critical thinking. But that might be something that the beginning of the course, the first week, you actually want the brainstorming, you want that general invitation to kind of see where students are coming into the classroom. Like, you know, what do you already know about this topic? Do you know anything about this? Share some TikToks, share some news articles you've seen, whatever, about this topic, and just kind of see what's out there. And then as the course is coming along and students have more to actually sink their teeth into, kind of moving into more of those critical thinking type prompts of like, a scenario they might want to respond to, or a debate that you're setting up, or some kind of analysis that's happening. And I see this work happening a lot too in instructional design when you're doing redevelopments. So the instructor has already been teaching something. Maybe they're moving their course from in-person to online or something like that. And they say, my discussions have not been that successful. Like, can you take a look at them? And it's really just that closed question. And then I'm like, well, I see that you're talking about, I don't know, I did a project management course once, and it was like, the question could have been something like, what are the components of a project plan? It's just one answer there. But then you could change the question to be like, you're working with a colleague who only puts these parts of the project plan out. You notice some things are missing. How would you respond to this colleague? What would you say to them to convince them the project plan was incomplete? Like, make a video of exactly what you'd say to this person. That's way more engaging and also super real world for these future project managers to actually do something in their career. And I've used AI for that too, of like, I want to make this the critical incident, which is more of the scenario-based prompt that really supports critical thinking. Or I want to make this the focal-based prompt that's a debate. Can you take the idea and give me 5 possible scenario-based options? And then I'll present it to the instructor and say, do you like any of these? What do you think? A lot of times they're like, how did you come up with this? I'm like, well, it was AI, but I knew what to prompt it. So I knew what the research was that I should ask it about. But it's not that you need to throw away what you've already been doing fully. It's just adapting it with the new types of media or different types of questions that actually support student engagement.
I love that. And that's, we get that a lot where instructors come and they're like, oh, my discussions in class are always so lively and robust. And, I just want to keep that in the online and keep these questions. And it's like, well, not everything translates, one-to-one. So, let's think of different ways that we can make it effective.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And adapting things too throughout the semester. If you see students really like, a certain kind of gamified discussion or a type of prompt that worked really well, maybe just do that again with new content. We design a course ahead of time that we hope works really well, but we also have to adapt it to those students who are in your classroom right at that moment. And maybe we have a lot of people who maybe their major has something to do with video or audio, and they're just, they want to work on those skills. Great. Let's just change it, do videos the rest of the semester. As long as you're engaging with the ideas, that's fine with me.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes for some students, and me especially, it's easier sometimes to say my ideas out loud than to type it. And, sometimes when I type, it comes out all jumbled and rambly. But if I'm talking, it's okay to be a little rambly.
Yeah, it's conversational. It's once again, focus on the content, not this perfect syntax. Nobody talks how they write.
Right.
I mean, sure, if we go through this podcast transcript, I had a ton of ongoing sentences or whatever, but that's just how people talk.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Brian, you have anything else you want to ask before we wrap up?
I have a whole lot more I want to ask. We
Yeah.
don't have any time for it. I feel like I have a nice new arsenal of information to take back with me tonight. I don't know if you saw both of us when you were talking about something earlier about how students can game the system. Adam and I both, our jaws hit the floor because I don't think we had ever considered that students doing that before.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, now I'm going to have to be looking out for this.
Hopefully I didn't give any potential student listeners any naughty ideas, but you never know what you're gonna come up against.
Yeah. No, I think this has been great, and this has been a lot of food for thought and a lot of fun ideas. I just want to ask, one final thing to kind of wrap up. What are 3 pieces of advice that you would give to instructors or instructional designers as they venture into developing some online discussion activities?
Yeah, great question to wrap it up. First, I would say to start with the learning objective, the learning outcome, because that's where everything comes in the course. But, how to actually do that is to look at the Bloom's level or whatever, cognitive level. I use Bloom's a lot, but there's different theories on there on the cognitive levels. But thinking about, if your learning objective says explain, or discuss, that's great. But if it says analyze or assess, you need to really make sure you're crafting the prompt in a way that supports the analysis. And I think that's sometimes where the prompt kind of falls flat, and some of those theories and research on supporting critical thinking using the scenario-based prompts, those sorts of things can be really helpful. And like I mentioned earlier, thinking about where you are in the sequence of the course as well. Is this just kind of that general brainstorming, or is this the last week and you want them to synthesize everything they've learned, or maybe even come up with something new? So just like everything in instructional design, start with the learning objective. The next piece of advice that we mentioned, but I think it's really my go-to, is to use those open, divergent prompts that support multiple answers. I think that's really where things go wrong. And kind of be open as well to using discussion roles or using different ways to really structure the replies, because the magic and joy of the conversation happens in the reply. And that, just like here, we've had a conversation. I said something, you said something, I was excited for what you said, I replied. It wasn't just the initial question you asked me. So being really intentional with students on the replies, I think discussion roles can be really helpful with that. And then I think just really being open to things beyond the alternate text-based, like we've talked about today. Gamifying your discussions, thinking about different ways to use video, audio. I've even actually thought about using tools like Hypothesis or Perusal to have the discussions be on course content. So like if you have a set of questions, but that you really want them to use this one reading, they can actually, those are tools where they're, students are kind of doing group reading, and they can highlight and annotate and send each other comments, but kind of having the discussion be on there as well, to make sure that it's really grounded in the course content and not just, something else. Being open to having students do scavenger hunts for things online that are, TikToks, Reels, news articles that are related to course content. Allowing them to bring in their personal experience can be really helpful too, to connect things to, that really helps deepen and cement learning. Any kind of real world application about how they might be using course content in their future career or their life is really helpful. So just being open to those different formats and different kinds of ideas versus just the text-based that we may all kind of be used to. And I guess you asked for 3, but I would say number 4, as we kind of mentioned too, are the clear expectations and the rubrics. I have to give the rubric shout out, because I think that's really important for students to know what's asked of them.
That was excellent. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you taking time and coming on the show with us today. This was very insightful, and I know I'm walking away with a lot of new ideas, and I'm sure our listeners are as well. So Maxine, thank you once again for joining us. And
thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure. So I really appreciated speaking with you all, and it was a great conversation. So it was helpful to some people out there.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, thank you for listening, and tune into our next episode. We are going to talk a little bit about feedback fruits, which we mentioned in this episode as well, but we're going to dive into that a little bit more in depth. So thank you all, and keep listening.
The Futures of Digital Learning podcast is a production of the University of Arizona University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to share with our office, go to the Contact Us link on our website, ucatt.arizona.edu.